Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Off the Rip, episode number 7, with some lovely guests. I almost just sent us straight to just a big screen of Brian's head, which would have been
you should have
absolutely
you
epic.
Have.
We might have to do that sometime just to keep him on his toes. Joining me this evening, I've got Katie Bedford with me, as well as BrianSaintt, head coach for the Minnesota Rocker. The talking points for the night, it's going to be a pretty good episode. We'll be going over everything from the Minnesota weekend and, of course, kind of evaluating what we took away from it when it comes down to comparing CWL to CDL, talking about the teams, the players that performed, maybe some of those that maybe didn't, and of course looking forward to what we got going on in the future with London coming up in about a week and a half's time. Let's just go ahead and start things off, just in case the viewers or listeners might not be 100% familiar with you. I know Katie and Brian have both joined us before on the show, but it's a good way to kind of reintroduce who you are. Katie, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
I was the host last year for the Black Ops 4 season, and now going freelance, but working some of the homesteads hopefully, and staying involved and streaming and doing my thing.
Oh yeah, we love to hear it. And of course, BrianSaintt, I already introduced him as the head coach of the Minnesota Rocker, but of course he's also dabbled in other spots and areas with his professional career of the Call of Duty League and before the Call of Duty League. Short-lived, but hey, it existed, right?
Yeah, the whole school thing was making it hard to compete, so I had to, put all my eggs in one basket.
And you picked a pretty good basket, apparently, with the 2-0 start for the Minnesota Rocker. Yeah, it's looking pretty good for you guys. Really, really fun weekend. But I wanted to just get a first reactions. I'm really interested to see what this is going to look like because, as the guy is just kind of a spectator, I kind of had like a pinned up, okay, CWL production looked like this, the scheduled format all looked like this. It was supposed to be almost like a taster of what we should expect for franchising. So I had, higher expectations from what everything looked like and how it was presented from CWL going into CDL. But I kind of want to get your guys' expectations as far as, what were you expecting for the weekend as a whole, whether it be, the YouTube part of the stream or the Armory as a venue or just the production elements, just kind of what were your general expectations going into this year in the first overall weekend?
I think Brian can speak to at least the Armory portion of all of it, but Armory, as I was not there.
Yeah, I mean they gave us a tour of the venue pretty much when we first signed in September, and just going around and seeing that space, I knew they were going to put on a really good show for this event. But just the scale of everything and all the production value was absolutely blew me away. The stage had a pretty much rivaled a champs stage, which is not what I was expecting at all.
I mean, what I watched from, like, I guess you could say, obviously from the third party perspective, I thought for an initial introduction, people need to remember, of course, that something like this is brand new. The entire production team is different. The locations are different. Everything is new. So there's a lot of people complaining about a lot of different aspects, whether it was YouTube or the amount of breaks or the amount of ads or what have you. And even the Codcaster stuff, obviously, I think you saw massive iterations and improvements on that throughout the 3-day weekend. But I'm excited to see what they do in London, how they iterate on kind of the feedback that they received there, because overall, I was incredibly impressed. I thought the production did a really great job. I think they need to trim the fat in a lot of areas. I think there needs to be a way, way less downtime between series. No one wants to wait 30 upwards of 45 minutes for a series. You don't need 5 or 6 death segments sprinkled in with random breaks, sprinkled in with random ads. So I think they need to trim the fat there. But overall, I was incredibly impressed with the whole thing. I think they did a really good job. So it was nice, at least, to see that they were seeing the feedback on Codcaster, like the third party perspective, the third person, and you were seeing less of it as time went on. So that's a good thing. That means they're listening, and we can definitely appreciate that.
It was interesting, simply because the announcement for the YouTube part of it was very, very late, I think is the best way of kind of putting it. It kind of seemed like I just spurred up, like, there were questions the day before, like, is it going to be on Twitch? Did they change the COD League? Is it going to be in the CWL previous page? Is it going to be multiple streams? And then the kind of news kind of jarred us a little bit that, hey, it's going to be on YouTube. And, we kind of had to play catch up a little bit, at least from an audience's perspective. But what did that all look like, at least from your perspective? Kind of maybe the integration between Twitch and YouTube, is that something that you think was pretty well done for the first bit, or do you expect to see some improvements there as well? Because out of all of us, Katie, you're the only one who actually got the chance to really watch through the YouTube portion of the stream.
Right. So I definitely think YouTube needs some work. So I'm taking an educated guess here. This is not something I'm stating as fact, but I think one of the reasons that the YouTube announcement came in so late was because the deal most likely was not done. That is
Sure,
why they
fair.
could not talk about it. That's why they could not promote it. And obviously that caused a lot of confusion for viewers. I had people constantly in my chat throughout the 3 days saying, where is this on Twitch? Why can't I find this on Twitch? I think that will be remedied if they do the appropriate amount of promo and information output leading up to London. But it just, I mean, I think in the sense of YouTube, it needs some improvement. I think it's a wider audience amount. You look at some of the clips that they were posting after the fact, and they're at 900,000 views.
Yeah.
So I think YouTube opens up a lot for people. The fact that you could all put everything into one nice little channel to watch from. But there needs to be improvements. The quality frequently declined. I got people complaining that it seemed like their YouTube frequently kicked them back to 360p, or there were stuttering. People were a little upset about the commands in chat, but those are all easily fixable things.
Right.
So I think for an initial foray into YouTube, it was good, but there definitely needs to be improvements.
Yeah, I think YouTube's putting a lot of time into their live streaming service. I mean, you can see just based off how many streamers they've been partnering with over recent times. But the main issue with YouTube Live for me is navigating the site. I feel like it's hard to find, where you want to go unless you have a direct link.
That was kind of my thing the direct link portion was kind of the only way that I ever got to it. I don't know how the search function works for, being able to search for like a category of live streams. I never tried it before, so I'm actually just completely ignorant on that fact. Do you know if there is a way to like navigate just like a game category like you would on Twitch, or is it you have to like search for the game in specific and hope that you find the live stream that pops up on your recommended? Or
I honestly have no idea. I've tried scrolling through YouTube Live a little bit, but I've been pretty lost.
I have no idea either. I haven't even looked, honestly.
That'll be interesting to kind of go back and try to play with that when London happens, because I imagine we'll all try to be watching that in some fashion.
Yeah, I think it's separated by pretty broad categories. Like, yeah, now it's like you have sports, you have gaming, just really broad categories, news, stuff like that. Can't really go game by game or filter it down like that.
And I'm glad that you brought up the point too, Katie, with YouTube kind of reaching a wider audience of especially Call of Duty viewership, because let's be candid, a lot of people that watch Call of Duty stuff are watching clips or videos on YouTube and might not necessarily be keen to watching live streams on Twitch. And like you mentioned, you're able to just directly put that into a YouTube channel where you can generate that interaction even more. I'm really excited to see if that will kind of spark a new type of audience for Call of Duty in specific for the esport. And with that kind of in mind, this was just a little bit of a side thing. I'm not sure if you saw this at all, Brian, just depending on where you were at the time, but the little hits as far as like explaining hardpoint, search and destroy, and domination, I thought were also extremely concise and well done. I was very impressed with that kind of bridging the gap between A, new audience, and B, the new production value that was in. I don't know how you guys saw about it.
Those a little bit. I think I saw it for S&D, not so much hardpoint or dom. The one time I saw it.
I mean, stuff like that's so important, right? The whole point of that is obviously it might be tedious and repetitive to people who know what's going on and are already in the scene, but what that does is lower the barrier of entry for new viewers. If you have a high barrier of entry, like look at something like Overwatch League. Overwatch can be extremely difficult to follow and comprehend if you haven't played it before.
Absolutely.
So the point of those videos and the point of those explainers is for someone who's new to it, or someone who's maybe clicking in and saying, what's this? Is, oh, here's some ground rules. Here's some bases for you to kind of build a foundation of your knowledge so that you're not completely overwhelmed when something is starting. And of course, most of the time, if someone's overwhelmed, they might say, fuck this, pardon my language, fuck this. I don't want to watch. This is too difficult.
Right.
So stuff like that, obviously, lowering that barrier to entry is very important. So I'm happy that they're doing it.
Yeah. That kind of brings me to the other kind of thing that I was most impressed with was not the escalation of just production value as a whole, but all of the different production elements that were brought into place. Brian, I'm actually curious from your point of view. Do you know by chance, was that all the little Minnesota things, when they were doing the candy bar guessing, I don't know if you guys got to see that on YouTube, because it was like one of those live event things that you see like when you go to a traditional sporting event, or when Chance went to Lake Minnetonka with the team. Do you know if that was more COD League that was pushing that kind of content on you, or was that the Minnesota Rocker that wanted to do those features?
That was all on us. The ice fishing one was a content piece that Activision came out for and set up, but everything else we all did ourselves.
Because I will say that when I was at the Atlanta Reign homestand last year during the Overwatch League home and away series that they kind of did a little bit of teaser of, and that just felt like a handful of people that lived in Atlanta came and watched Overwatch in Atlanta. Being in Minnesota, though, it felt like you were at a home sporting event. I mean, with all the little inclusions and stuff like that. And I was curious about that the whole weekend, was how much pressure was COD League putting on you guys to make like the special intro teasers and to do those little intermittent kind of showcase things, because it was very, very well received, I think. I thought.
Yeah, I don't think they really reached out to us at all to make any of that stuff. I think that was just all stuff we wanted to do and kind of bridge the whole traditional sports to esports gap, because they have the Viking experience and everything like that.
Sure.
They use a lot of people from that team to make those videos and get all that up and running.
Did you guys get a chance to see that?
Can I just ask very quick, Brian, I have a very important question for you. Where did you guys find all of the jackets for your hype video? Because those are the most amazing jackets I have ever seen.
They had like some stylists bring a bunch of different clothes, and everyone, she was like holding them up to everyone. It's like, okay, you're wearing this, you're wearing this, you're wearing that. We didn't really have a choice or say in any of that.
I loved it. A scene was great. I loved it. I thought that every time I watch the video, I'm like, this is the fucking best thing ever. It was great.
When we first saw all the outfits and everything, we were like, what is this? Like, there's no way we're doing this. But it ended up turning out a lot better than we thought it was going to.
It looked super cool. Like, at first I had the same reaction, like, what are these jackets? And then you kind of saw it all put together. Yeah, it was really, really dope.
Yeah, it came out nicely.
Last thing I want to hit on, at least as far as the first reactions go, the stage was, I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, Brian, that it looked like a world championship final stage, because it absolutely did, especially going from what we had last year, which was in that kind of small remote Columbus studio. What were your guys' general reactions to like what that energy looked like when it came to setting up the venue the way that it was set up, whether it was the stage or whether it looked how the armory looked online, and as far as how the camera angles and all that played out to be, was it that you think that's one of the, like, they were fitting out the space properly, or was it just like did it completely exceed your expectations like it did mine?
It definitely exceeded mine, because I've been to concerts at the Armory prior to this event, and the stage setups there did not even, compete to what we had this weekend.
I thought, at least from a viewing online experience, in terms of the stage, I would agree with Brian. It looked excellent. It really looked very, very, very good. I kind of did love the bleacher stands behind each of the respective teams. Obviously, you're not always going to have like a full stadium for something, so it's not the greatest when you have shots with empty seats, but like that happens anywhere. You can't avoid that. But the stage itself, I thought really all the shots of it, I thought looked really, really, really good. So.
What about crowd stuff, anticipations or expectations? I'm kind of interested because Katie, obviously, being at open events, that's a very different dynamic, because usually the first couple of days, pretty empty, but then everyone loses in the open bracket and they show up in the audience and it gets pretty loud, usually at one point in time. Also, of course, being at London, that was like the climax of everything crowd related. But also, Brian, you being in Minnesota and you kind of getting to know some of that community in some way, what were your guys' expectations for the crowd as a whole going into this first event? Were you expecting less, more?
I was expecting a bit less. I think it definitely exceeded my expectations, especially for our matches. How loud that crowd was getting for us, and how they were booing the teams we were playing was definitely not what I was anticipating at all.
I loved that. I loved that you heard booing in the crowd. I mean, that's what you want, though. That's one of the integral parts to having these home and away games, is that you want kind of that hometown pride for people, right? So I loved the booing. I loved the cheering. Like, I wanted the chants. That's great. American audiences aren't necessarily known for their rowdy, loud behavior at these events. So to see that, I thought was awesome, and I hope that carries. Of course, it will happen in London.
Yeah, it's going to be insane.
Yeah, London's going to be nuts.
I hope it carries through the rest of them as well, because that was great.
Yeah, I had made a Twitter post about it, and I kind of, this was just, my thoughts on the whole thing, kind of reflecting back. I was very, very impressed with the amount of elements that were reintroduced, the freshness, the newness that was kind of brought in with this new production team. The ability, like you had kind of brought on and kind of cleared up here, Brian, with the Minnesota Rocker putting so much attention on the things that were happening, likely during what commercial breaks were happening. If you guys didn't, I don't know if you guys got a chance to see some of the stuff that was going on in between the cuts when you're going from desk to break and stuff like that, but they had like the skull drum line was there for the Minnesota Vikings. The Timberwolves break dancers came out on stage, which I know players and coaches had different thoughts about that happening while they were trying to coach their players. But beyond that, the fact that as a audience and spectator member, it really did feel like you were immersed into a Minnesota crowd. The one thing though that I think is missing is they need to find a way to get someone in the community management team to put together like the Rocker Rowdies, where it's like literally college basketball student section. They're never sitting. They're always coming up with cheers and chants and things that are just more unique than "Let's go home team, clap, 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 clap." That's like the one thing. That's the one thing I would love to see home teams try to take to the next level, is try to find a way to make like a student section crowd, whether it is like in that little back area, like behind the team, or somewhere in the audience. Because let's be honest, like you guys mentioned, NA crowds typically not exactly the most enthusiastic, but I think if you take those couple of wild individuals that are shared about and put them into one space, esports kids will follow what they hear. I think that'd be like the only way that they could have made the experience that much better. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that's hard, right? Like, one of the biggest differences, obviously, like between a London crowd and why it's so rowdy and aggressive, and this is because of two things. The drinking age is 21 in America, and the football culture in Europe inspires a lot of that rowdiness, a lot of those chants, a lot of that engagement at events. So you combine ability to drink when you're 19, 20, 18, and that culture that you grow up in with these aggressive chants and these back and forths. You're going to inherently have more of a loud, rowdy crowd somewhere like London. Whereas in America, of course, sometimes it takes a lot of people a beer or two to feel relaxed enough to want to shout and yell. So I think there's ways around that per se, but I think that's always going to be a really difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah, it's a big culture shift.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's just that's the one thing. It's like you're dealing with these kids that are mostly 18 to 22, peak college age kids. Get some traditions started. That's kind of what I'm looking at. And then I kind of want to finish off the conversation. We talked briefly about the improvements. Is there anything that you kind of saw that maybe you would like to see more improvement in? I think my biggest go-to obviously is Codcaster stuff. I think the elements that they were able to reintegrate,
Can
were
I get
good.
a KD?
Just a single stat line, please.
Bad one. It wasn't up there at all. They did a better job over the course of the weekend.
Yeah,
The scoreboard more, but that's still something I would like to have there the entire time.
I agree. So I agree with Brian. I think it's definitely that's the major thing for me in terms of Codcast, or in terms of the in-game experience. Other than that, I mentioned it initially. They need to cut down on the fill time.
Sure, pacing stuff. I'm glad you brought that up.
I mean, when there's tech issues, you can't do anything about that. That's understandable. Sometimes you just have to fill. But the constant break, desk, add, break, whatever, add, break, something, throw, whatever. It was a little disjointed, and I think they could definitely trim the fat there.
Did that throw you guys off at all on stage? When you guys were playing, when you had map 2, typically there's a break, but or first day it felt like map 1 was done.
First day was bad.
Yeah, we're going to desk. Then it was map 2, we're going to desk, then such like that. What did that pacing kind of feel like as the weekend progressed for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, the first day was definitely rough for us because we didn't end up playing until, like a few hours after we were scheduled to play. And there was only 3 matches that day, too. So we thought, we'd kind of be up there relatively soon. However, that wasn't the case. I think when it got toward the last day, though, things were moving a lot faster and a lot more fluently. So as long as they keep going in that direction, I think things are going to be good. The tournaments, though, are going to be really hard scheduling-wise, though, because those are going to be a 6-match day and then a 7-match day.
Right.
That's brutal.
So I don't know how they're going to cram everything into that, because our longest day here was a 5-match day on Saturday, and that day ended up going 4 hours, late.
Later than that's supposed to.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. And I don't know how much you guys spent time watching the Overwatch League, but that was, I think, what a lot of people had gripes about initially was you're playing 3 matches and it's taking 9 hours to get through these 3 matches. The cutting the fat away and finding a way to pace it so it does move a little bit faster, because not only is it hard, I think, for someone who is watching to spectate for that long, whether you're live or online, but I think it's got to be even more taxing on the production team as a whole, whether that's broadcast or behind the scenes, as well as the players and coaches that are trying to get involved. Like you mentioned, sitting around waiting for your game, not knowing when that's going to happen. That's got to be pretty tough. I'm glad that you guys brought that back up.
It is extremely fatiguing as on-air talent when you have days that are that long, because you have to be on the entire time. You might suddenly be in a 12 to 13 hour day and you're on the desk or you're on the stage or you're casting, and you have to keep that energy up. And realistically, you're sweating, you're tired, your feet hurt, you're hungry. There's a million different things going on. You have bright ass lights in your eyes forever. And when it extends and extends and it goes, it can be extremely fatiguing. So I definitely don't envy that. But again, I think they will iterate on things if they find something's not working. I've said it repeatedly. We saw iteration occurring this weekend. If something doesn't work, they will fix it.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how that all kind of goes from here. So let's talk into the actual results, because, let's be honest, that's what a lot of people are excited, and I'm sure why a lot of people are tuning in. Let's talk about who specifically for you guys surprised, whether that was in the good way or a bad way. Katie wants to start off. Take it, talk Paris. I love it.
Oh my gosh. So here's the thing that I was very impressed by Paris. Do I think that they're a top 3 team? No. But people thought coming into this that they were going to get absolutely steamrolled, choke slammed. They were going to get 6-0. They weren't going to win a map. I was incredibly impressed by them. I was very impressed by Kismet. I thought he was underrated last year. He did very, very well in their 2 matches over the weekend. So Paris was the biggest surprise for me by far. The fact that they're leaving the event 2-0, I was incredibly impressed by what they did. However, I don't, in terms of Optic, I would say I don't necessarily think that was more telling of Optic being bad than it was Paris being better than everyone thought. I think Optic's still middle of the pack. They'll find their form and they'll be great, but it spoke more to Paris's ability than Optic being worse than we thought.
Sure. What about for you, Brian? Any thoughts on the Paris squad? Did you get much chance to watch?
Yeah, no, I definitely like that squad a lot. I mean, before I signed here, I was in talks with them, and the players that I was thinking about bringing over, if I signed there, were pretty much everyone they signed now. I wanted to get Alex in there as well. Kismet isn't someone who I was really thinking of with that squad, but he ended up slotting in there really well, and those players are all, performing how I thought they would. I just didn't think they'd be as good as they are right now, due to the limited amount of practice they were getting, being in Paris for a month, and then a bunch of them had to go back to Australia for visa issues, and they just got to the US about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. I think that 2 weeks ago, I think almost to the day, if I'm not mistaken. It's interesting because, I was very big on Luca, watching him play through the PLQ and watching him play in the amateur bracket last year. Shocks, obviously right there with him the whole way. Kismet, I thought, was absolutely great. I expected Brezzy to be the player to start, but the player that most impressed me, I would say, out of that entire squad was how solid Zed played, and Dens. They both looked really, really good throughout the entirety of the weekend, and those were 2 players that I thought coming off of Black Ops 4 would just be kind of middle of the road, but they really shined, I thought, with that Paris squad. I was really impressed with the way that they specifically played.
There were a few players across multiple teams that had been lackluster in the Black Ops 4 season that looked strong in these 2 matches. And again, I mean, you got to keep in mind, right, that they only played 2 teams each, and you haven't played everyone and whatever. Right. But even folks like Classic on Toronto was impressive. Yeah, there were a few folks I looked at that I was like, all right, I see you. You didn't make the biggest splash last year, but you came in and I'm impressed.
Just curious. I mean, again, there's been lots of talks about obviously power ranking stuff, but where did you guys previously have Paris in your own mind, and how much has that changed after the results this weekend?
I mean, I had them in the 11-12 spot, because I couldn't judge them at all. I thought they were going to be very slow with their lack of practice, and we never played against them at all. The first time we ever scrimmed them was, a few maps at the venue on Friday, Friday, and they were actually looking pretty good there. So, kind of after that scrim, I was like, all right, these guys are, going to come out and play this weekend.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. I put him in the 11-12th slot initially going into this. I might bump them up a few slots, maybe, but not a ton. I don't think
Sure.
they're a top tier team yet, but it's really hard to make those rankings with the limited knowledge we have. Realistically, power rankings are usually bullshit because it's all speculation.
Yeah.
We hadn't even seen people play S&D, so
Until this
how the
weekend.
hell am I
That
supposed to
was a
judge?
question mark.
Yeah, so usually they're all just bullshit, and if you get it right, then pat on the back, good for you, you're omnipotent or some shit. But most of the time, who knows? So I want to wait a little bit till we get to London till we start seeing a lot of these teams play each other.
Yeah, I think the initial power rankings, there was quite a bit of accuracy in those, surprisingly, because if you look at most of the polls before, like the top 4 teams, most people had, ourselves, Chicago, Atlanta, and all of us went 2-0 this weekend. So I think there was a bit of validity to them. But, as it got down a bit more, a lot of teams jumped up and a lot of those teams went down.
Yeah, my biggest thing, and I think, I kind of expected the outcome to be a little bit tight when it came to Optic and Paris. Both of those teams were kind of sitting in the same ballpark when it came to how I was kind of thinking of where they would be. But what was most surprising was after London had completely stomped New York, that Paris came out and completely stopped London. That was the biggest surprise to me, and that's the next team I kind of want to bring up is this New York Subliner squad. I initially had them pretty high up, and after they got smoked by London, they put up a pretty good fight versus Atlanta, to be completely candid. What are your guys' thoughts on this now currently 0-2 New York squad?
I was particularly underwhelmed by Temp's performance.
Same.
It felt like more often than not, I saw him going negative. Zuma was great. But it just felt like there was never a time for New York where everyone was on the same page or felt like they were firing at all cylinders or even like most cylinders. Sometimes you'd see Zuma going double positive, attached, doing well, but then Temp or someone else was falling drastically short. So I'm not really sure what's going on over there, but I'm sure Brian perhaps can speak a little bit more to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams, their performances hinge on their main AR player, and you're gonna need your main AR player to put up relatively good lines for your team to be successful. And these past 2 days or this past weekend, accuracy didn't have the greatest weekend for New York, so
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think that made everything hard for all the subs on their team. Because when you're running one AR on most maps, you kind of need that guy to step up and perform a bit. We had Assault going off for us this weekend. You look
Yeah, he
at
popped off.
Chicago, Formal was playing insane, Celium and Major Maniac were both playing super, super well for Atlanta. So I think a lot comes down to the AR presence.
Yeah, I think that you saw that specifically when they were playing up against Atlanta on Petro, just the ability of them just not contesting any of that mid ground. But I will say, why I'm kind of a little bit lost as far as what to put this New York squad was they looked awful on Hackney Yard domination versus London, and then they played it against Atlanta and actually played it pretty darn well. It really wasn't like you guys mentioned. Zuma and Attach, I think, were the two consistent players for this squad throughout the entirety of the weekend. But the fact that they were able to still keep what was, we'll call it a consistent performance when they played up against London versus when they played up against Atlanta as far as the individual sense of it goes. As a team, they looked so much better on that domination, and I'm interested to see how that team goes from here. It just kind of comes down to, where do they fall right now after having, a really bad performance versus London where it didn't look that they were ready to play, and then coming out and, again, they were one hill rotation away from being able to take map 1 off of Atlanta with really kind of one mistake as far as the 5 guys were hitting old time on one of the hills. And then again, they almost had a chance to send that to a game 5. But I'm interested to see where these guys are going to pin up when the season kind of gets going, because it was not what I was expecting from the team. I thought they were going to play a lot better than they did. Anyone else that kind of popped up for you guys? Let's talk about Minnesota, who's 2-0. I think expectations were generally around that ballpark considering the schedule, but I'll be the first one to say that I did not expect it to be Silly and Assault that had the huge weekends for you guys, but it's kind of hard to say that they had huge weekends because everyone really played pretty well for you guys this weekend.
Yeah, no, everyone showed up for us. That's kind of how our team has been looking in scrims as well. Goddard X is kind of, always a highlight player. He's going to be, our main slayer who's looking good on the scoreboard most of the time, but pretty much everyone on our team carries their own weight.
So I did an article with CDL before everything went live, and I reached out and I chatted with a few folks. I chatted with Silly from Minnesota. It was 16 players and coaches, and consistently the one team that almost all of them across the board were like, you are, this team is a dark horse. You're going to expect good things from them, was Minnesota. Yeah. Almost everyone. There was lots of Mutineers. There was lots of Florida added in, a sprinkling of Toronto, but almost everyone was extremely impressed with how Minnesota was playing. And whenever Minnesota came up, I was just like, I can't wait for Goddard X on S&D. Like, let's go. I can't wait to watch them. Silly Assault playing incredibly well, but walking away from that, and even Asim, I think, when I finally, in that last match against Toronto, he'd kind of been having a little bit of a slower week, but when I saw him at the end stand up and yell, I was like, he's feeling himself. He's feeling himself now. He's gonna go off. He'll be good. And he did that, and they were able to win things there 3-1. But I was very impressed. Watching Goddard X play was really fun Call of Duty.
He's such an incredible player. I can't speak highly enough about him.
I was most impressed with Asim. Like, I think you hit it well. It was during that domination. He had the clutch factor, came through and secured it. Mm-hmm. Man, I'll tell you, I'm excited to go back and rewatch that Toronto, Minnesota series from the YouTube's perspective, because at least from where I was like front and middle of the crowd. It was getting wild up near the front. I'm hoping that all got picked up on crowd cam and crowd mic, because it was a very thrilling set.
You can hear it on YouTube for sure. Yeah.
That's what we love to hear. Let's talk about the big three, at least going into this one, because I think that's what a lot of people want to hear about. Your guys' thoughts. Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta. Dallas getting an awful draw as far as the schedule goes. Immediately after a patch, they have to play up against Chicago and Atlanta, the two best teams, I think, definitively now after the weekend, currently in the CDL. What are your thoughts as far as those three squads go, whether it's Dallas versus them or just individually the Chicago or Atlanta squad?
Atlanta definitely performed how I expected them to. They're pretty much the team we scrimmed the most online, and then they came here and we played our facility for a little bit, so I knew they were gonna be absolutely insane. That team is just top to bottom filled with insane levels of talent. Some people are question that they don't have like a leader in game, but all those kids, even though they're young, step up and have really, really great comms. So that team's just going to be a force all year. I don't ever see any point where they, drop down or slump. Dallas definitely shocked me a bit because they were always super, super hard to play against online.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the more recent weeks, you saw them falling a little bit because we used to just get smoked by them every single time. But, we were starting to split series versus them leading up to this event. And Chicago, they always seemed pretty good to us. We would kind of go back and forth with them, but on land they looked
insane.
They looked quite a bit better than they did online.
I was underwhelmed by Chicago's S&D performance against Dallas. Obviously, they got 6-1 on our club.
Yeah, it was not pretty.
That was not even close. But then they turned around, and poor Dallas didn't even have a chance in that domination. I was underwhelmed by Dallas. I was underwhelmed by Shotzi in particular. We'll see. They've got a ton of talent. They've got a ton of knowledge, a ton of leadership on that team. So, they're not short on tools to try and figure out what's going on. But they did also have the two hardest teams. It's not like they were playing the Gorillas. It's not like they were playing, Paris or Optic or anyone else. They played the two best teams.
Yeah.
So whether that means they're third in that top three or whatever, we do need to keep that in mind that, they had a very tough lineup for the first 2 days.
Now,
yeah, without a doubt.
I got to throw this one out there because I think the question merits to be asked. Do you think there were some sort of land jitters when it came to Illy and Shotzi in specific in that first series? I mean, Shotzi obviously did not play all that well. Illy played okay, but both of them were taking uncharacteristically over-aggressive challenges. Of course, it's you can't say that Shotzi's not experienced on land because of his Halo career, but this is a totally different ball game, totally different ballpark as a whole. Do you think that there is some consideration that there was some early land jitters for those younger kids?
I don't know if it would really be land jitters. I mean, shots he's played on the stage before, I don't think that's really going to affect him. More so Illy, if anyone, because he's only ever competed at a few small locals. So, first match there's always going to be a little bit of pressure, especially when you're going against Chicago like they did. But I think London is going to be a super important event for Dallas. They're really going to
I
have to
think so
bounce back
too.
there, or it's going to hurt them mentally.
I agree.
It's interesting to think about, when it comes down to, again, they don't have a lot of turnaround time to go, and now you're going into a very hostile environment. Let's be completely candid. I guess there is some favor towards Dallas because of the pool that they were drawn into, so they won't have to play up against, technically, they won't have to play up against that London crowd until if they get into that final bracket. But we'll talk about that here in a second. Anyone else that we mentioned a number of individuals that we were kind of talking about in specific. What did you guys think of the Wuskin and Scraps duo? They looked really good for London throughout the weekend. I was actually really impressed with how Wuskin handled the sniper rifle specifically for London. You looked great on Piccadilly specifically in my mind.
Yeah, Wuskin was definitely their standout player to me this weekend. He was kind of the one player on the roster that I didn't regard, as highly as the rest of them, but he really stepped up and he played awesome.
Yeah, 100% can't agree anymore. Wuskin, when I was watching, I was getting so excited because you kind of looked at that London roster and you're like, oh, Wuskin, you're the one I'm a little concerned about.
Sure.
And he just came out and fried. I was incredibly impressed with how he was doing. So that's great to see. He was another of those players like the Wuskins, the Kismets, the Classics, people that came out and just really, I think, shined this weekend. So I love to see that. Sincerely, I really love to see how well Wuskin did.
Any other thoughts as far as any other teams that you guys maybe were a little bit surprised by? I mean, I think Optic LA, going 0-2 was maybe a little bit of a surprise, especially considering that best of 5 versus Paris. I will be candid. That was some of the sloppiest Modern Warfare I think I've seen so far this year between both those squads. But anyone else in particular kind of come to mind when you're thinking of, who looked good or who looked bad in the opening weekend?
Seattle's S&D was
oh boy,
real rough. I mean, they went to that game 5 round 11 in their second series and were in that 3 versus 2 on Ramaza, and they fell short there and they ended up going 0-2 on the week. But same thing I kind of said about Dallas. They've got so much talent and history and knowledge on that team that I and Nubsy, of course, is their coach. I have full faith that they'll figure it out, but I was a little surprised at how timid their S&D was. Their offenses were slow. They never seemed to be very aggressive. So I was a little underwhelmed by their S&D.
I think their S&D is always going to be pretty underwhelming with that roster. I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to figure it out with the players that they have. They don't really have, someone who's going to go in and make insane plays in S&D on that team. Everyone is, a bit more on the passive side. So I think they're going to have to work on S&D a lot if they want to reach that next level. Their respawn looked good, though.
Yeah, the respawn did look really good, but I think that was definitely a little bit of a jarring shock to see them not really knowing what they wanted to do, especially against some of the adversity they came up with how fast some of the teams that they were playing up against ended up kind of executing. Let's talk, though, about what's coming up, future homestands. We'll just start the conversation first and foremost. London, home crown advantage. In case you're unfamiliar, you did not see how what groups were going to be posted. These are some matchups. Dallas and Seattle and Chicago and Los Angeles Guerrillas will be in Group A. Paris, New York, London, Toronto will be in Group B. It'll be Dallas versus Seattle first, Chicago versus LAG second, and then you got Paris versus New York, London versus Toronto to start off those group brackets. Again, if you're unfamiliar with how those will work, it's not your traditional round robin. It's set up in kind of a double elimination 4-man bracket. You win 2 games. You get into the final bracket, which is the final 4 teams from both the obviously A and Group A and Group B bracket. You already talked about how you want to see Dallas bounce back. They've got Seattle first. Chicago's got LAG. But what else are you kind of feeling in some of those matchups as we look forward to London in a couple of weeks?
I need to pull it up and see who plays who. Yeah, do you have a
I do.
Yeah, if you can shoot us a link, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely.
My knee jerk while I'm not looking at matchups is that after watching scrims online of Chicago and Lag, I mean, we didn't see the S&D, so I can't comment on how those went, but I watched Chicago wipe the floor with Lag in 5 hard points in a row with really very little contest going on. But Lag also came out and performed much better than I was expecting.
True.
We're just not going to talk about that forfeited S&D. But so who knows what'll happen there? But at least in that initial one, as we pull up the schedule, I am fairly comfortable in saying that Chicago is probably going to win there.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely have to agree with you on that one. I think the matchup I'm most interested in for the first round of matches is it has to be Dallas versus Seattle. I think both teams are coming out trying to prove something. They both went 0-2, so I'm really excited to see how that one plays out.
I think all four of these matches have something to be considered. I think you're absolutely right, though. Where I think the expectation is that Chicago shouldn't have a problem with LA. But I'm interested to see if Paris can stay consistent, and get better and improve, going up against what might very well be a crowd that does not want to see them succeed versus no matter who they're playing up against because of the fact they're from Paris and they're in London. But I'm also interested to see if this London team is able to kind of bounce back a little bit and if Toronto can stay consistent. It's kind of like that Group B is full of question marks. There's really not anybody there right now that I said that after what I saw that, yes, this is the best team in that group. Any of those four could technically come out and still be on top of that group, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, honestly, I think London's probably going to come out on top of that group. I think the home crowd's just going to be so insane for them. I think it's going to, help carry the momentum. Although they are going to have to get through Paris, who pretty much battered them when they played this past weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Other expectations, so as far as that how that home crowd is going to look like, or what do you want to see the venue like, or things of that nature? I mean,
it's the same venue as last year, so I don't know how it's going to look. Stage setup wise, I think the production, is going to be awesome. I think the crowd's going to show up exactly how they did last year in London.
I agree. I think it's going to be loud and wild, and if there are beach balls, something is going to get thrown at Clickster.
Has to be. I mean, at this point, come on, it's the way it's got to go. What else, though, just kind of to finish things up, or maybe final thoughts, and as we're kind of wrapping things up, if you guys want to type in any questions at all into the chat, feel free to do that, and we'll copy them down for you guys. But, other things as far as homestands, are there other things that you guys are kind of looking forward to, maybe not necessarily just for London in specific, but, going to Atlanta after that, or then you've got the double on Los Angeles the weekend after that in week number 4. What are the other kind of big things that you guys are looking forward to as the year kind of goes on?
Just to see how all these tournaments progress. I don't know how it's gonna feel winning an 8-team tournament opposed to a tournament with everyone there. I don't know if there's gonna be trophies or like a ceremony at the end of each tournament. I'm just excited to see how everything plays out. And the playoffs this year, I feel like is gonna be the biggest event Call of Duty's ever had, and the stakes for the playoffs this year are gonna be higher than any chance we've ever had.
And to that note, I am excited at how competitive all of these teams feel.
Yes.
Right? Like the spread of talent among all 12 teams and the performances of those teams over this weekend. I love that it's not like you're going into a series saying, all right, well, this is going to be 45 minutes of 3-0 domination, yawn, call me when it's over. Every single one, I feel like you're going to go into and be like, I don't know what's going to happen because the competition is so close, or at least competitive with some of these teams, that I think, to Brian's point, that's going to make playoffs, that's going to make everything else even better when things are so neck and neck.
I'm interested, I think, to see if there will eventually be a point, especially with this format with the brackets. Obviously Aches brought up the whole conversation point that Atlanta and Chicago don't ever play each other in the opening groups as far as like the initial schedule. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at that at all, but
yeah, I've been glancing through them, and I definitely agree with him. I think with a new tournament format like this, when the tournaments are essentially league matches, there needs to be a lot of parity in the scheduling, or it's going to create a lot of imbalances. And with how much is on the line for playoffs this year, you can't really be having anything like that.
Did you get a chance to catch up on that at all by chance, Katie? That happened earlier today with that post?
Not really. No.
Fair enough. Speaking of, though, I just kind of hit me. What were your guys' takes on Crimsix in his post-game interview, kind of calling out IW? Did you get a chance to check that clip out?
I just saw the article headline for it or whatever it was. I think what he did, he just complained about the patch, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah. So essentially, to kind of put it in layman's terms, he went out there and was not happy that he had to go through the post-game process at all after losing like they did. But beyond that, the fact that they show up to a LAN where a patch drops while they're there, for our major event, and kind of talking about how this is not the first time, it's not the second time, it's not even the third time that this has happened, and that IW needs to be more responsible. It's kind of the same lines with AX and the competitive integrity. How can you have, essentially the argument he makes is, how can you have a competitive integrity when it comes to a professional league where the game radically changes right before a major event, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened so many times in COD already. I'm definitely not happy that, it's kind of become the standard, but I don't know. I think things need to change soon. Patches right before tournaments are never a good thing unless they, just clean up some bugs or stuff like that. But this was quite a big overhaul. It changed Dom.
Yeah, it changed the entire way of how you play Dom, right? I mean,
yeah, Dom was, easily looking like our best game mode going into this event. And with the change, we didn't expect to win either of our Doms. I felt like we were kind of lucky to win both of them in the way that we did.
Mm-hmm. I gotta say, the Toronto Minnesota, that was the best series of domination, the best game of Dom the whole weekend. It was so fun to watch, and like sometimes you watch Dom and you're like, ugh.
Yeah, it's
and the whole time I was like, because I was doing the watch parties on my stream, I was yelling, I was getting hyped, like I was so excited because it was so neck and neck. That was definitely my favorite. Anyone who's watching this, if you didn't catch the Minnesota Toronto Dom matchup, you need to go watch it because
it was really good.
That was some great Call of Duty for sure.
I guess kind of the follow-up to that question is, with this recent change, or maybe the bolder question would be, as you had more time to watch and maybe even play Dom, do you feel like, because at one point in time, Adam Apicella had gone out on Twitter midway through the first day and said that domination should just be out of the competitive rule set, just make it hardpoint and S&D. Did you feel like this Dom was more entertaining to either play or watch when it came down to the changes? Do you feel like it's finding a spot in the competitive rule set?
I don't mind Dom at all. I think it plays better than CTF did in this game from the time or two we tried CTF, and I think Dom will be pretty good once they fix the stacking issue with the CDL rules.
Sure.
Right now, it's definitely in a bit of a weird spot how you can't stack the flags. So there's a lot of situations where a B flag or something is neutral and you're just fighting for a flag for just on and on and on again. I mean, we saw it in the beginning of our Hackney verse. Toronto, where no one kept.
Yeah, no one had a flag
for the first 3 minutes of the round.
Katie, what are your thoughts watching through Dom this weekend? Did you find that it maybe had the same level of excitement or a similar level of excitement that maybe Control did from last year?
Oh God, Control was my least favorite.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh no!
I mean, I didn't hate it. I never particularly loved it.
I feel the same way.
I loved Control.
Yeah, I was always just kind of like sometimes once in
it
a
was
blue
super
moon.
Entertaining.
Exactly.
Where I just dreaded it.
Yeah, exactly. And there were sometimes I was like, all right, strap in, folks. Here we go. But I don't mind Dom. I kind of mirror what Brian said, and that I think Dom can be good. I don't mind it. I certainly don't dislike it. And if you can start to consistently see games like we saw between Minnesota and Toronto, it was just so fun to watch.
I think that with this change, and again, with a little bit of tuning, it's going to be in a closer spot, because I think we maybe saw only a handful of games that actually broke the 200-point barrier. Before the neutralization change, it was, all right, whoever hits 200 and essentially 10 points first wins the game. And then usually we're sitting there watching a minute and 30 seconds of useless game time. That didn't really happen as much this weekend. I still think there needs to be, like, it's mathematically impossible for this team to come back. Game has to just end. Yeah, but beyond that, the times did become mathematically impossible. It was only like a maximum of like really about 45 seconds or so.
Unless the map was, a complete stomp. I think there was one phase Dom where they kind of ran through and won by like 70 points, but every other Dom seemed relatively close for the ones I remember at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were. Most of them were pretty close. They were at least a comeback could have been made, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the neutralization, it was at one point in time that you're either getting 36 points from full doming or only getting 12. Now there's the opportunity to get that 24 point, which is kind of nice. If you're not familiar with that, again, if you're capturing one flag, it's technically 12 points per minute that's in there. So if you capture two, they're capturing one. you're generating 12 points a minute. So yeah, I like that there's a little bit of an extra element of strategy involved with it. And I'm interested to see how the game will develop and if it will become a little bit more competitive as we go through. Let's take a look at some of these viewer questions though that we've got coming up for you guys. A handful of ones. This is a barn burner. Let's put us all on blast real fast here. From Imran, he goes, "What were Optic's main problems? Do you guys think?" Wow, that's a tough one to answer because my initial reaction was there are a lot of problems that this team has to go through to try to figure themselves out. But I'll let the coach start this one off with Saintt to see maybe what he was able to see.
Yeah, Optics in a bit of a weird spot right now. I think having Slasher on a sub hurts them a lot, but
Agreed.
at the same time, Dashy doesn't work on a sub either. So I think the meta needs to shift a little bit to help them out. Like if there's a comfortable 2 AR meta, I think that team will find good form. But right now they're in a bit of a weird spot role wise, and no one really performed, super well for them. They have the talent. I think some of the players just need to find their rhythm to the point where everything's super synergized with them.
I agree. In terms of the rhythm, I mean, I kind of look at Optic right now a little bit how I looked at 100 Thieves last year.
Yes.
Is that it's like they had all the puzzle pieces there. They just need to fit them together correctly. So I think I have full faith that they will find their form. But to Brian's point, that's rough if you're shifting someone like Slasher off of the AR just because of course how powerful the MP5 is right now. But I think they'll find their form. It's just going to take them a little bit of time to get there.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the whole weapon meta shift because I 100% agree. My only concern, and I'll just put it out there, I'm not saying that they're going to run into this, but my only concern, with that 100 Thieves squad from last year was they were able to find themselves a Crowder and a Priesta. And at the moment, I don't know if anyone on that team is going to be able to form up like how Priesta was able to kind of fit that role that they really, really needed to get involved and make sure that everyone was able to find a comfortable role. I will say it was enlightening to see JCap playing as well as he did. I know a lot of people were pretty down on him and seeing him not performing well in scrims, but he actually, I thought, had a pretty good weekend for the Optic Gaming squad.
Yeah, I actually got do you have like a link for the stats right now that I can kind of take a look at?
I do not have any on hand personally. I don't know if COD Stats GG's up and one up, but I 100% agree with you that it felt weird watching Slasher run around as the roaming SMG for that team.
Yeah, that's kind of how they've had him playing recently, and I don't think he's too great at the role. It's not really his comfort zone.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see because I think you're right. I think if there's able, I think that the other side of the thing too is they need to step away from playing SMG maps. I want to see them play like more Azir Cave, more Gunrunner Dom, get them into a spot where they can actually like hold lanes a little bit harder too, and maybe pull off a double M4 without having to worry about.
Gunrunner Dom has become very sub oriented. Like pretty much everything Gunrunner, I've seen teams run 5 subs on lately.
Really?
Yeah.
It was tough too on Azir Cave. I mean, there was a couple when Optic was playing that for hard points. They seemed like they struggled so severely in the cave rotations, whether it was holding them or breaking them. Every time I watched it, it was like the moment it got to that hill rotation where it went into cave east or whatever else, it was just like, all right, this is going to be a rough 60 seconds here. We'll see what happens.
It really felt like when they were playing Chicago, I mean, there were a couple of different instances where they were 5-man hitting scrap time at different points. It just, again, it feels like there's like no one who isn't really, it's a little bit lost as far as like who's going to be that guy. If you're going to go contest scrap, who's going to be that guy or that duo to go contest scrap while everyone else rotates. It's going to be interesting to see how that team kind of progresses from here. Going into our next question, though, maybe you guys, I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch through any of the challengers bracket because it obviously was not streamed, but is there any particular challenger player that you have your eye on? Maybe it was someone from Black Ops 4 that didn't get picked up that you're looking forward to seeing how they do in Modern Warfare, or if you had a chance to maybe even watch the one best of 5 that we saw on the main stage. Was there anyone that is keeping your eye in tune?
Yeah, I prefer to look at younger talent when it comes to the challenger events. So Mac Melts is definitely someone I'm going to keep my eye on since he just turned 18, and I think this was his first event. He's at some locals before, but I like keeping an eye on the younger players who kind of just get their way into the scene.
Katie, anyone for Black Ops?
I wasn't really able to follow much of Challengers at all, so I can't really comment on that.
Were you, by chance, maybe more surprised that there was a player that did not get picked up on a pro roster that you were expecting to get picked up, that you're interested to see how they would fare in the open side of the bracket going through this year?
Not off the top of my mind. I don't know. Maybe like pretty much like all the people on Fellow and that whole team.
Mhm.
Right.
I think what they got like top 16 or something. I
I
don't think
think
they
so. I didn't really get a
yeah,
chance to
I
look
don't
at the
think they lived up to
placements.
their expectations. Parasite's team got top 16 as well when they were one of the teams expected to win. So I'm kind of interested to see how Challengers keeps progressing. But right now, I'm kind of keeping my eye on Singularity a little bit as well since they just won.
Yeah, Insight looked really, really good when he was playing through the weekend, from what I was able to tell. I'm interested to see how players like Exotic do. I was actually really surprised that Exotic wasn't considered for even a sub spot. I thought he had a really good end of the year, and I
Yeah,
was
he's a super well-rounded player.
yeah. Yeah, I'm interested to see how he kind of fares as we go through. And of course, we're just excited to see more Challengers matches as we go. Interesting question, controversial one. Does Minnesota still win the Gorillas match if they don't forfeit that S&D? I'll spare Brian on this one initially. My reaction is yes, they still win that match if they don't forfeit that S&D, and they still go, if they go down 0-2, I think they still win that series.
I think we still win the 2 respawns. I mean, you never know what's gonna happen game 5, but I still think we win both those respawns since Hackney Yards are best map. So I don't know. Who knows what would happen in the game 5?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to speculate on what ifs, but that was my thinking when I was talking about it on stream was, well, team vibes or whatever. I still think Minnesota would have won the Dom, would have won the second hard point, and based on the first S&D, because I don't know like what teams' preferred maps are. Like I didn't have any of that information.
No one really knows.
Yeah, right. So my gut feeling was that based on that first S&D that I might have leaned toward Gorillas, but realistically, I think it could have gone either way. But 100%, yes, Minnesota was gonna push it to a game 5 if it got there.
I was kind of in the same boat. I think that what I saw from the Dom, what I saw from the hard point, if it were to have gone to a game 5, I think the momentum would have just been equally as killed as when it was after game 2 and the ruling came through. I think that would have been absolutely a reverse sweep in the making. Last question for us is before we wrap things up this evening, and we kind of already touched on this one, so maybe we can kind of frame it up a little bit as far as maybe expectations into the future. Did you expect to see the home crowd so involved? The Minnesota matches were far more hyped than the classic, the Classico match. My expectation was about what we got. I was personally a little nervous that there was not going to be a giant escalation or as big of an escalation in energy in the environment when Minnesota came on to play, especially in the first one versus LA Gorillas, where the expectations for the team was a little bit kind of all over the place. And I think a lot of people had Minnesota winning that matchup to begin with, but I was extremely impressed with the amount of involvement that was there, and I think that's a great way for the NA teams to see what is possible from a crowd and how you can inspire a crowd to kind of find an identity with your squad. And now we're going to get even more of that piled on with London because they're just going to be nuts the entire time.
Just drunk, going crazy.
That's what we want, though. We want drunk and crazy. We want wild chants. We want things being passed around in the crowd. I love it. I think if anything needs to be fostered very aggressively and encouraged, it is the hometown mentality. We heard it in Minnesota. They were loud. They were a little bit rowdy. I want more of that. Anyone who says like I don't like the takes that booing is bad, welcome to competition.
It's a sporting environment now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The cheers, the booing, the engagement of the crowd is infectious, right? We talk about how US American folks can be pretty quiet and reserved. And if you can foster that hometown environment, they're also more likely for some of those folks to get a little loud. So if anything, I would love to see the league trying to find ways and the teams try and find ways to encourage that behavior at their tournaments.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about how the LA crowd is going to be since it's like
it's a split
it's
crowd.
It's a dual hosted event, so that one intrigues me the most. How things are going to work out there.
I'm borderline kind of hoping that if you go up for ticket sales, like you say, are you an Optic fan or are you a Gorillas fan? They try to maybe even like bridge them and put them closer together, so that way it's kind of like a, you know, when Texas plays Texas A&M type thing. I've got this whole mindset that it's going to be like college sports, and I feel like it needs to be somewhere like that. I will say though, if you're someone out there that's even remotely considering going to a homestand, not only should A, you absolutely go because it was incredible, but B, don't be one of those guys that there goes, oh, like getting beyond the level of going along with the chant is cringe, because I am not necessarily a Minnesota fan, but being in the Minneapolis, you know, the area and being in part of that crowd was so much fun.
It's infectious.
It was so much fun. So even if you're not, let's say you just live in Atlanta, you're not, or you're going to Atlanta, but you live in South Carolina, you're not necessarily identifying with the Atlanta team, go and just join the Atlanta crowd. Don't feel like, oh, well, it's whatever, I'm just going to sit here and clap and hit my boomsticks together. It's so much more fun when everyone gets involved. It was a lot of fun. Final thoughts from you guys though before you wrap up. Maybe things in past, present, or future that you're looking forward to.
Just want to thank everyone who came out to the Minnesota event this weekend. All the fans were amazing. All the, you know, CDL staff, everyone who put the event together, absolutely awesome. And, you know, shout out to Rocker, everyone I work with for, you know, throwing an awesome first event.
Yeah, shout out definitely to Minnesota. They put on a banger of an opening weekend. I can't imagine the pressure that falls on the shoulders of the organization that has to host the inaugural event. So huge props to them. As for me, I'm hoping to see y'all at a couple of the homestands. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, huge props to Minnesota. It was a great first weekend, and I think it's only onward and upward.
Yeah, expectations are very high, I think, for all of the other teams that are you know, looking to foster the same kind of facility. But a massive shout out for what Minnesota was able to put together, and of course the production team and everyone involved. And again, if you enjoyed the broadcast here this evening here with Checkmate Gaming, this will be shortly uploaded to our YouTube as well as on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify, where you can also catch our previous 6 episodes on your favorite podcast provider. And of course, we try to do this every single Monday, so don't go too far. Coming up this weekend, we're also trying to bring out the monthly finals of the playoffs of the ladders. So I think we're trying to do the duos as well as the full squad. So if you're interested in watching more Checkmate Gaming competition, make sure you stay tuned here. That's going to do it for Katie Bedford and BrianSaintt, but I hold shit. We'll catch you guys next time around. Until then, hope you keep holding it down. Later. Bye-bye.